a good place to kick off probably is with the survey. So if you guys want to flip on to the next slide, you could. We did a survey at UnLtd at the back end of last year, November, of the industry, so the media, marketing and creative industry. And to kind of take it a little bit back, the reason why we did this is, for me, the first 6 to 12 months in the job, a lot of what we do is build corporate social responsibility programs within organisations. And one of the questions that we ask people when we go into their organisations is, what are the areas that you really want to work in? What are you passionate about? What are the causes that you're passionate about? And 9.5 times out of 10, mental health was coming up as the area that people really wanted to focus on. So we knew, for a number of reasons, that mental health was an area that we wanted to explore a little bit more deeply. So we partnered with an organisation called Never Not Creative, who work in the creative industry, ourselves, a government organisation called Every Mind, to conduct a survey at the back end of last year of the industry. And it kind of blew out quite a lot of different results. And it's not meant to be there as a kind of something to scare people away from the industry, but it kind of told us a lot of what we anecdotally thought and were hearing in lots of the conversations. You can see some of the key stats on the screen there as well. But I think some of the headlines that came out of that is Every Mind have done this survey across multiple different industries and you know, comparative to other industries. What it was telling us was we're much more likely, up to 20% more likely, to be suffering from mild to severe signs of stress and anxiety. They use what they call the DASS scale, depression, anxiety, stress scale, to measure that, which is, you know, very prevalent and common in medical areas as well. So, kicking off with that, the reason why we did this was because for us at UnLtd, we really want to support the industry in various different ways. You know, the healthier industry that we have, the healthier we can drive value back into our charity partners as well. So for us, it wasn't about doing a survey and going, look at that, isn't everything fault? It was more about what can we actually do about that to make our industry and help our industry thrive. So, in light of some of those stats, I might start with you, JJ, because you're nearest to me. Any surprises there? Any comments, any thoughts?
So I suppose it's one of those things you look at and at first you feel it's damning and it comes as a surprise. But actually the more you think about it with the experience and you think of the situations that you and we are all constantly in what is a very fluid space, it actually isn't a surprise, particularly with personal experience and managerial experience that I've had, and wrote an article recently in ExchangeWire. I think they were expecting another update on my UnLtd protocols or something. And actually, it was related to particularly management of specialist staff, where you get a 95% of a business not knowing what the hell some of you guys in the room are doing, let alone your own managers that don't have the experience of what you're going through, which makes it almost impossible for them to ascertain or empathise what you're experiencing. And if the communication isn't clear between you and you feel unable to express what you're experiencing, and it's when you're younger it can be more difficult, that becomes a bit of an issue. So it's something that I felt was worth highlighting, having been through it in my youth, where I was definitely chasing happy, having a great time, but not sleeping much, incredibly stressed, always on. I could have told you inventory levels off the top of my head about everything. It was just a non-stop, even on holiday, always on, because that's the way that the business is, and to make it work, particularly in smaller businesses, it had to be like that. And I was having a great time. I thought at the time that the impact was fairly negative, I'd say, and it made me more aware and empathetic. Then, as an older manager, particularly of both ops and salespeople, particularly at operations, and particularly building specialist teams with skill sets that the HR department and ultimately senior exec managers have no idea what the hell they're doing day to day. But it's just sad because it's such a great industry. We can have such a great time when it's going well, and there's a big part of me that says 80% of my time has been amazing. Just that 20% of the impact that it had, but just want everyone to be cognizant of as individuals and as you get into management, new people.
Yeah, and I would say, ironically, I wouldn't always look at this as a big negative thing, because there's, we all have a mind. We all have some form of health. We all have days that are better than others, and this, that, and the other, and that's okay. There's a lot of stigma around some of the language and terminology within mental health. You flip that on its head a little bit, and there's a lot of positives that can come out of that as well. Claire, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I wasn't at all surprised by the numbers here. I think, as Jonas said, it's a bit of a negative thing. But I think, as a business, we have to be conscious of the impact that it has. And I think, by the numbers here, I think every single one of my clients has anxiety in some form, and so I work just within our industry. I think we have a culture generally, and it's exacerbated in our industry, I think, but of being rather overworked and overwhelmed. And I think the danger sometimes is also our addiction to overwork and overwhelm. And you're right, I mean, there's realities that we face in this industry, but I also think it's incumbent upon us ourselves to recognise where we are the problem in that situation, because there are things that you can do to take care of yourself to make sure that you minimise the impact that the environment can have on you. I think the reality is that, especially when you're younger and in your career, and it's one of the reasons why I burnt out twice, I was very driven. I wanted to do a really good job. I was always on, I was always available. My boundaries weren't great. I'd take calls on Saturdays. I'd check my email first thing in the morning as soon as I woke up and last thing at night, and I was always on. When you're always on, your brain cannot rest. And a big part of this problem is we are not giving ourselves any space. The challenge with that is that you are already exhausted before you step into the office. And we have jobs that require us to put our full mental capacity into the work that we're doing. So our work is suffering. So it's a systematic issue that we're facing. And Chris and I were talking about this earlier, it's systematic everywhere. We've got CEOs under pressure from shareholders, put the pressure on the CMO, so the client is putting pressure on the agency, and the agencies are putting pressure on the publishing teams, and on it goes. But there are ways that we personally can self-manage. And so that's the thing that's interesting to me, that whilst these are pretty big numbers, to me that's an opportunity. Because whilst we have to recognise our part in the problem, we're also our own solution, and that's what I think is really interesting.
Yeah, it's a very good way of looking at it, and I think we can explore that a little bit deeper in a moment or two as well. What about you, Jonas?
Can I first just ask, are these stats for the whole media industry or for digital?
Yeah, it's a real mix of media marketing and creative, but almost 2,000 people completed this survey. It was promoted through channels like the IAB, the MFA, the Comms Council, and ourselves as well, so it's cross-section.
Cool. I'm also not surprised. Whilst I was reading it for the first time, at first I was surprised by the bottom right stat that said 18% shows severe, extremely severe signs of stress. That surprised me. I thought, wow, that's really low, until I finished reading the line that said it's 57% that shows some level of stress. I'm like, well, that sounds more like it.
Yeah.
And then I was really concerned by my own reaction to, well, I expect it to be at least like nearly 2/3 of everyone that's showing levels of stress. And I thought, shit, that's bad. What are we doing to ourselves? And I definitely worry more about my own team's well-being than I do of my own. I know that for sure. I regularly use the word burnout with my team, and then they look back at me and say, well, what about you? And I say, I'm Superman, whatever. But no, it's something that managers need to be responsible for as far as their teams go, and for themselves as well. And everyone needs to have an element of responsibility for themselves. And it's definitely something that probably should have been, brought to light a little while ago with the benefit of hindsight now. But it's great that we are actually talking about it, because I think if you said who cares about mental health, every person will put up their hand in this room. So it's, the surprise is really, why have we waited, to me.
Sarah, I guess with two hats on, you spent a lot of time in the media world, and you're still sort of there. Now you're in this completely new industry, which is an industry that I think mental health has probably been a conversation for a lot longer in as well. Do you want to give us a bit of an insight into your thoughts on both?
Yeah, definitely. So the AFL does a lot of work in this space, as you can imagine, with athletes and clubs and players. The approach to me has been, what I've seen in the business of late, is that they're now trying to take that whole mentality about how to help and coach people on field, off field, into the office, into the more corporate environment. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest insights that the team have pulled out from our HR department is that actually everyone really wants to help each other. And unless you've experienced something yourself, and Chris and I were talking about it, if we both had a mental health issue, we were mentally unwell, our symptoms and the way that we feel might be completely different. And so often it's actually hard for a manager or anybody in your team, where you are used to most of your time, is unable to really identify if you're okay or if you're not okay. It's actually interesting, we had a business in recently to try and identify and help us set up this kind of almost manager's first aid, like mental health first aid for managers and leaders, to actually help us identify whether you think you're actually concerned about anybody in the team. And I was like, I wonder how you approach it. Do you kind of, anonymously tell somebody else that you're worried about Jono because he never complains, and I actually think he's really busy and I'm a bit worried about him. And they actually said, no, the best thing to do is to approach Jono directly and be like, hey, I think you're actually struggling, are you struggling? And actually just deal with it head on. And that was a really interesting insight for me, because I thought it was one of those things that you kind of brush under the carpet. And so when I look at these stats, it's really interesting, because I reckon if you did this survey a few years ago, people might not have admitted it or said anything about it. So it's kind of, I think times have changed quite significantly in a really short space of time. And so people are now actually willing to go, yeah, actually I'm not having a good day, or I'm having a good time, or and so it's actually, it is shocking, but I do think it is an opportunity, because at least now there's a problem to be solved, if you like. But the AFL take it really seriously, as you can imagine, as most businesses. Actually, that's actually not entirely true. They do take it seriously, and I was just about to say, as most businesses do. And it wasn't that long ago, I was in the media industry in the heart of it, and I'm not sure actually whether the media business does take it seriously, actually. And so maybe I'm taking for granted whether it's funding, or whether it's resource, or whether it's awareness. I'm not sure, maybe a combination of all of those things. I'm actually not sure if everybody is taking it quite as seriously in terms of solving the problem, because this problem is an investment, ultimately, when it comes to either resource or training. We have psychologists on hand that you can call up anonymously. It's a service for every single staff member that no one needs to know about if you don't want them to.
Yeah.
That's actually quite a significant investment. And I think when you're in an industry, it's really under pressure from a revenue point of view. Unfortunately, I feel like these sorts of initiatives and this investment into people becomes a nice to have, but actually it's clearly the most important thing that we need to worry about.
Sports have talked a lot about managing the people and then the player. That they've been doing that for a while, and that partly perhaps because most high-profile sports are largely male, and they've just sort of done one thing very, very well and live in a slightly weird environment. And I'm not sure the blokes are that great at opening up to even the question, "Are you okay?" Even to probably the people they're closest to. It's something there that they are well ahead on.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on stigma as well. I mean, the stat that we see in the bottom left-hand corner of that as well is, as an industry, we're all very willing to accept and work with people who may be going through mental health issues as well. But not many of us want to talk to people. Yeah. So there's still that stigma. It goes to language, it goes to the way we've kind of built up our systems over life as well. I mean, we were talking earlier on, Claire, about hierarchy. I know for me, one of the things that happened with me working in the media environment for a long, long time, then all of a sudden the job goes, you're made redundant. What that actually made me do, amongst the shock of that, was reassess what my metric system was. What's important to me? Because you go through school, you go through university, you're grown up to believe that important is wealth, and it's about next job, promotion, money, whatever you can build, and that's really successful. And there's a new book out, I can't remember the author, there's a book out called Climbing the Two Mountains. When you get to the top of that first mountain, you kind of look around, you're like, oh shit, is that it? Is that kind of what happiness is supposed to be? Like chasing happiness. But that metric system, I've got a couple of them. Yeah. That metric system, I think, is really important as well, and to individually assess what it is that's important to you as well.
Well, there's an Australian culture of suffering in silence, because no one likes a complainer. but then, everyone's worried if I do actually say, oh, I have anxiety. You're worried that, the person who just asked you, are you okay? And you go, well, yeah, I have anxiety. You're worried that they're going to look at you and go, like, all right, calm down. No one wants to hear your life story. But that's honestly how people feel. That's how I know plenty of people who've gone through that. I've had those thoughts and feelings myself. Like, that is our Australian culture.
But that's self-awareness. So what's happening when you're made redundant and you have that experience that you go through? You sort of pull yourself apart and you break yourself down and you have to build yourself back up again. But what you're actually doing is building self-awareness around yourself and working out what your priorities are, what's important to you, and who you actually are. And that's sounds easy to say, and the sort of thing you hear in your 20s, like, it's bollocks. But then the older you get, the realisation of that, its importance, that there should be alignment in your personal values in terms of your behaviour and what you do every day, because it's based upon those value prioritisations. And sometimes it's hard, and it will flow. It'll ebb and flow as you go through your career as you get older, whether you have children or settle down with someone or whatever your life stage is. It's just about, to me, that's about self-awareness. And it's a very hard thing to do.
Yeah, and talking about what you do every day as well. So bringing it back to this room as well, and what you guys do every day. From my experience, which is very much sales side as well, and encompassed ops to an extent, and later in my career as well, I always felt, without really knowing what to fuck me, the people in AdOps get the worst deal. There are stresses in operations, there are stresses in ops that are different to other stresses as well. Do you want to speak specifically to what some of those issues may be, and how some of you guys who've got a lot more experience in that field may manage that?
My mother was delighted when I announced I was a trafficker. I don't want to talk too much because I've done a lot of the AdOps, so I can certainly jump into it. But Claire, you straddle a bit of both, and we've talked a lot. We used to talk a lot about how we get sales and ops to work culturally because of the lack of empathy and the stress that both teams were under.
And I think that's even sort of highlighting on something that Jonathan said. There are different degrees of mental well-being. I'll call it well-being instead of mental health. There is stress, and then stress can become chronic stress, and you could be in a state of chronic stress, which means symptoms of depression or anxiety might start to surface, but actually it's chronic stress, and then there are clinical conditions. So there's a range, I think, and a little bit to what you were saying, it ebbs and flows throughout your life. So no life is perfect. I also don't believe there's such a thing as happiness. I think it's a journey. I think we have glimmers of it, but I think it could be a dangerous thing to chase.
It could be a nice thing.
It could be a nice thing. There are moments of it. But I think when it comes down to that ops and sales and then marketing and strategy, everyone has their own stuff to deal with. But I think what often comes out, and this is also a little bit around that kind of talking about organisations that don't necessarily walk the talk. Because I think there's a lot of box ticking around mental health and well-being at the moment. But when you get down to grassroots, what actually happens day to day in that office, right down to how people speak to one another, how much space people give one another, all of these things have an impact on their health and well-being. And I've seen it countless times where you get a really extroverted salesperson like coming over and just running at someone in ops. Where is my staff? And there's no respect for what that person might be working on, or are they in the middle of something, or anything really. Now I've seen it go the other way as well, where I've seen really smart, capable people in ops basically telling salespeople that they're imbeciles. So right, it goes both ways. So I think, but fundamentally it comes down to respect.
There's a lot of smiles in your face.
You don't know what you're talking about. You don't respect the craft.
If you're a salesperson. Everyone's a salesperson.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really no matter what role you inhabit, it's about a little bit of empathy, self-awareness from your perspective, and respect for each other. Because actually, if we had more conversations with each other that aren't necessarily over 12 years, we might actually get a little bit more understanding of what the other party's going through.
Yeah. Anything to add down the end?
I Yeah, I think taking it. I'm not a mental health expert, so I relate it in my own view to more like managerial skills. Everything that you just said, empathy and listening, is probably the most critical part to working with both sales and ops people. Something that I've realised over the years really is that the most important thing that you can do is actually just close your notebook or close your laptop and sit there and listen to someone who wants to probably vent for a couple of minutes. And you usually don't actually have to do anything after that. They get it out and you say, all right, cool, should we speak to this person? What do you want to do from here? And a lot of the time, the result beyond that is just, you know what, I feel a lot better now, and we can move on. And if you just take that small nugget, that works both sales perspective and ops perspective. Salesperson will initiate that by storming over and slamming things on desks. And then ops person will do it in the other way, where they'll just kind of go at their desk, hoping no one notices. And people just want to be heard and listened to. And I think there is a point here, it circles back to someone who doesn't disclose that they are suffering. A lot of the time, they've probably just had a bad experience trying to disclose that. And the person who maybe asked the question wasn't actually listening. Like, I don't want to necessarily say a salesperson, but let's say a salesperson, looks at an ops person and goes like, oh, you seem, how's your day? You seem a bit stressed, like, you all good? And the ops person, looks back at the salesperson and goes, oh, it's been a shocker, this campaign's not going well, and I had this, and salesperson looks back and goes, cool, so, they wanted it yesterday, so can you just drop all of the issues that you're having over there? They're not as important as me, and it works both ways. But they might have actually, been quite sincere when they were saying that they were not having a great day, and the person who asked pretended to be sincere. It's not always a salesperson. But they're good to pick on and listen for. But yeah, it stems from that. Someone maybe asking the question without actually bothering to listen to the response.
There's a bit of a contrast there, isn't there? Because one element is saying we should be asking the questions, and then if you're going to ask the question, be prepared to listen.
Yes,
A lot is about listening, about empathy, and showing that as well. It's also important to know, as was mentioned earlier on, it's a really broad scale that we talk about when we talk about, anxiety, stress, depression as well. If you're a real end of the scale where you're talking about severe instances, then nobody here or many people in the workforce are really equipped to deal with that, and that should be a recommendation of Lifeline, Beyond Blue, whatever it may be to help.
But you can see the signs of it, like a balloon that you can just reduce the air in it. There's a sign that there's a different conversation to be had without having that initial. And I think that actually there is a place for the 12 beers every now and then. There's a bit of an outlet. It shouldn't be an ongoing solution in one's life or in terms of management, but there's the time to get it, it all comes out.
You're defending the 12 beers.
Yeah.
Unlike you.
Surprise.
I just drink wine like that.
But I also think this is really hard when you're really busy and you're really stressed. It's really hard to do it with everybody. I think, and I've really learned this, and it stands out to me a lot working in AFL, it's like perspective. So I run all the media, so I didn't really quite understand what that really meant in the AFL, so I got here, which means that every single journalist is going to write about you on the weekend, and I have to know about what those things are. And someone called me on the weekend about something someone had said, and I was like, I'm really struggling to get as animated about this as you. I'm really struggling. It might be because I'm not a footy fan, sorry everyone. But also it's really, nothing is going to help you more than something really bad happening in your life, really bad happening, or really tragic happening, to give you any perspective. My husband's mum recently died in the UK for 3 months, and someone's calling about this journal. I'm like, I really don't care. You know what I mean? I think perspective is really important. I think it's really hard to have it on a day-to-day basis when you are stressed and someone is asking you some stuff and suddenly it does seem like the most important thing in the world. I just don't know if what we do as an industry, getting my country, is that important.
Yeah, no one's right. But that's absolutely right. It's your real life. Sounds like it's totally great.
Strongest to get really like, you know, some people in the room that I've actually worked with, like, you know, people who know me work, I mean, I can get quite animated about stuff, but more, not because I don't take it home with me.
No.
And so you have to kind of learn that. I think that's a bit of experience. And I think what we all need to do is kind of help each other and go, hey, it doesn't matter.
That's right. I mean, when you meet people who have a proper job, like nurses or A&E or life and death stuff.
Shit, my campaigns go live. Okay, we'll go live tomorrow. Okay. You know what I mean?
I had a stressful period of time where I was taking it home. I was thinking about, you know, I was waking up in the middle of the night going, oh shit, how do I forget to do that? And then after a little while, and people at work were noticing that I wasn't quite myself, because most of the time I don't particularly care about anything. And so they didn't notice at first because I was my usual grumpy self in the morning. And then after all, and I was saying this to one of my team members, you know, just in the last day or so, what changed was that I just kind of like stopped one day and I was like, oh man, it's not real life. I just remembered that I don't actually give a fuck. And it's really important for everyone else to have perspective and to think about things outside of real life, outside of work life, and just remember that distinction between work life and real life.
Yeah, it's a good point as well, as much as we chuckle at that as well, that for anyone who's read The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, that was my realisation moment when I went, why do I care about all of this trivial stuff? Don't get me wrong, I mean, our jobs are important and we're there to carry them out and do the best we can do, but the more balance you can get in each of those different areas of life, the more perspective about what it is that actually is valuable, what your purpose on this earth is, which could be to traffic like a, you know, king or queen, is important, you know. But I just wanted to flip something on its head a little bit and kind of talk. I want some questions from you guys as well for the panel. I know Sarah's got to leave pretty timely. Is top tips from you guys in terms of, okay, so how do you, what kind of tactics, what things have you used to help yourselves and also your teams and your workplaces thrive?
So I suppose from having had empathy with what's happened in when I was younger, when managing people, it's sort of that sports manager where you manage the person or the player. It's just caring about people as a starting point beyond them as a widget that you're utilising to do the most efficient thing within the business. So just be prepared to. I mean, sometimes people seem to lack basic management skills, which is one thing an academy is for. But I'm often surprised with the number of people that have management responsibilities for people who are slightly psychopathic. They really shouldn't be responsible for anything. They're better about themselves because they're so unhealthily driven towards certain things. Just give a shit about people and care for one another. It's just a basic starting point for more or less anything or life generally.
So I'll take give a shit out of that one. I think that rings true in many different ways as well. Claire?
I absolutely agree. I think I'll talk a little bit, about personally, sort of warning signs to be aware of. If you start to feel quite disengaged or consistently frustrated, if you are starting to snap at people and feeling like you're just sort of not coping day to day, that's a warning sign. If you're not sleeping well, that's a warning sign. If things that used to give you pleasure, whatever that might be for you, it might be exercise or going to the gym, and that used to make you really feel amazing, but you're really busy right now, so you're not going to the gym, and then you get into this cycle and then you're not going. You start to give those sorts of things away, that's a little bit of a warning sign. If you're constantly distracted, unable to focus, and this is, I think, is a big one, and this is chronic everywhere. Our inability to focus on a task through to completion is a big problem, and I mentioned that before, but if you're in a constant state of distraction or looking for distractions all the time, then that can be a warning sign. I think in terms of tips to manage, first of all, like I said before, it starts with you, and the same thing is if you start to notice someone in your team. just be a human being and have a discussion with that person. Like, just be a human being. I think we're losing our ability to deeply connect with one another. And I think for ourselves, we're very hard on ourselves in this industry. We expect a lot of ourselves. Our employers expect a lot of us. So a little bit of self-compassion goes a long way. And then trying to build in a little bit of structure. So maybe in your mornings you don't pick up your phone first thing, you give yourself half an hour to just get into your day. Obviously I made a bit of a joke before about the drinking, but things like that, if you start to excessively look for vices to make you feel better, that's another sign. Or spending all weekend binge watching Netflix and hoping the phone doesn't ring because you just seriously don't want to talk to anyone. Do you know what I mean? Just be aware of the things for yourself, which shows that the stress is sort of getting out of control, and stop. And I think to your point, you can just stop. Stop doing certain things or habits that you have and start doing something differently. That was long-winded, I'm sorry. I feel very passionately about this topic.
That's really good, thank you. Jono?
I was going to say be a normal human being.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy that great minds think alike, but I'm also really competitive.
Maybe you should be in sales.
There's no need for insults. No, I'm back in sales bit. And also I want to apologise to Rowan. I feel like I've been bagging out the chasing happy a little bit and started a downward trend. But I mean, he never stops smiling, so he's all right.
Different folks.
I still think be a normal human being. And I remember a long time ago when I was describing a previous boss to a friend, and it was, laden with profanities, and then I described a new boss to a friend, and they were asking why is this new manager so good? And I was like, you know what? He's actually just a normal person and acts like a normal person. There's no class distinction or status distinction. There's just simply, we have this working relationship, and based on mutual respect, you will do what I tell you, and I will listen to what I was told purely based on respect and not a forced respect. And I think that kind of applies everywhere. And if you then translate that out with everyone, empathy, respect, speaking to people like a regular person, if you follow a basic premise like that, then it just translates everywhere you look. And having this attitude, and the attitude between, I've joked about sales and ops clashing. I don't necessarily see it in that respect. I kind of think of it as all status within a company. Treat the cohort with the same respect you treat the CEO. That should just be a given. That's a part of being a normal person that people tend to forget. And if you just go back to basics with that, and be normal and listen.
Thank you, Sarah.
Good tips. We're going to get back to kind of careers panel, members and career advice. I would say listen to your gut, because it's always right. So if you're working in a place and you're really trying hard, you're really trying to go against the grain, you're trying to make it work, and you're feeling stressed, you can't say anything to anyone, it's probably not right. So whether it's changing a job or it's changing a company, it's kind of being really honest about that and trying to find another environment that's going to help you be happy but also thrive. I don't know about you guys, but my gut's never really been wrong. I will try to deny. I think someone mentioned earlier that I think you kind of thought you loved the company. I was working in a company, I thought I loved it, and I had a baby, and I realised I shouldn't like the company that much. But I didn't have my baby at the time. I went back into another job immediately, but the point is, you kind of tell yourself a story. You kind of say, it's a really great place to work, I'm really doing well, I've got a great job. But even though that's probably not right, you kind of ignore it. So I would say that, don't waste time. It's the right thing, then move on somewhere else.
Can I add a bit to that in relation to anxiety? Because an understanding of what anxiety is something I've personally become more aware of. I had physiological symptoms that I thought was something else, and it was actually extreme anxiety that I've had for a long time, and I traced it back and realised what it was. And it's changed a lot in how I cope with things and how I'm an outlet. And joking with Dennis yesterday, because Dennis is always in the gym, that's why he looks like a triathlete. But actually that as a healthy outlet for a bloke who's on a plane more than on the ground is fantastic. Rowan's cheery. I don't know if you know that Rowan can run 100 kilometres. He is a proper long-distance ultra runner, and he has that very healthy outlet and that sort of balanced life. But it takes it. I had to go about it the wrong way and realise I was probably drinking too much at times, or approaching things in a jolly way and being obsessive. Sleeping at times 3 hours a night was quite normal for years. That's an obsession, but it's an unhealthy obsession that eats away at you. And resilience comes in lots of different forms. And very often, sadly, if you have painful childhoods or experiences when you're young, that builds resilience. You're almost indestructible, but it ebbs away in a different way. There's always something that you give back. So be very aware of what anxiety looks like, and the difference between that sort of positive excitement about something that's going to be awesome and something that actually is nibbling away at it in a very different negative manner. It takes a while to kind of figure it out. But a lot of that is gut feel and, understanding yourself. So,
can I just add as well to all of that, emails on phones, it is one of the worst things for the industry and the world for everybody. And we all have our emails on our phones. I check my emails on my phone. I'm one of the biggest culprits, but there needs to be an industry-wide conversation around the expectation of companies as to having access to email from one's phone when you're not physically at your desk.
You know what, that's really interesting, I agree. But on the first one, Kelsey, as we become more flexible, we can become more flexible in our work because of the devices and technology that we have. So actually, in some ways, being able to access your work anywhere you are can actually be positive in some ways. I totally get obsessive. I look at my phone way too much. I think phones are really, probably really bad. But actually, there are some really, really amazing things that technology enables us to do. And working flexibly is a really big enabler to be able to cope with everyone's different challenges in their life. We have one guy in my team at the moment, amazing, really engaged, really wants to work in the team, but he's got mental health problems that just really struggles in the morning. Really, just cannot get going. So we changed his work hours to start at 11 because he just is not a morning person. But it just means that if he can't make it into the office for that day, he can go and check his email. He can still be doing work, still earn a living.
Yep.
But I do know what you're saying. There's another side to it.
And I totally agree with all of that. I think and I'm not saying, ban the phone email. I think it should just be more of a conversation up front. I remember when I was starting out, I was in awe of my manager at the time checking their email on their phone, wow, how important is you? That's awesome. I want to do that. And then eventually, I graduated to a position where I was allowed to have, the password on my phone. So I hate it now. But that was instilled in me back then, where I was just kind of trained around thinking I need to have my emails on my phone and to be checking outside of hours and to be checking when I'm not supposed to be working in order for me to be doing my job. And that is what I'm saying needs to be changed, where it's almost like if you're going to be working for a company and have your email on your phone, maybe it's just a checklist up front. When you're setting it up on your phone, there should be a couple of questions that say, do you plan to, just a reminder, don't check this at midnight. Something like that.
Can I just add to that? There's a difference between a company has expectation that you will respond to an email outside of work hours versus our absolute addiction to checking our phones.
Yeah.
And we all have it, whether that be email or social media, we are addicted. So it comes back to, and there's a couple of really good books, Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport's a really great book on how you can start to break that addiction to your devices. But this goes back to what I was saying, we're not actually functioning very well. Our ability to focus on anything for longer than a minute is seriously compromised at the moment. So I agree with you. I think that there's a difference between that expectation, but it's also on us to kind of start to break that habit a little bit in some way, whether it's, like I said before, half an hour in the morning. That half an hour in the morning, though, can be a game changer to your entire day.
You need to find that balance, right? And if it comes from a place of trust and you give your people autonomy to manage their time as appropriate, Because sometimes, do you know what, if there's an email that comes in at 11 o'clock because there's an inappropriate ad or malware in the ad server or something's happened, you need someone to do something. So you can't just close down. You're still responsible for a critical part of the business. But within that, there needs to be flexibility and understanding and empathetic management around, and you having the autonomy for it to sort of work within certain parameters.
I agree.